As the storm continues to rage on, the medical students later heads into the body storage facility. While discussing the types of bodies they'd want, Sean reveals he doesn't want a damaged body, yet Don insists they should find and choose a deformed body instead. Harvey enthusiastically agrees with him, because a deformed body isn't easy to find, and it's also better for their training. Suddenly the hazmat people from before came out of the storage room. After delivering the bodies, Don had a bad feeling when he saw them, and when one of the men walked past him, Don noticed the man had a crazed look within his yellow eyes. This weirded Don out so much that his jaw dropped, yet Harvey would snapped him out of it before they had to obtain their bodies. They then met with Professor Choi, and obtains his permission to acquire a body. After entering into the storage room, the crew was shocked by how many new bodies there were. Yet Harvey was fired up, and they soon choose one of the boxes. But after opening one of the boxes up, Harvey was surprised by what he saw, and Don was also shocked when he came over to take a look, because the body had a deformed hand. Harvey thought they were lucky to have found a deformed body on their first box, but Don felt like something wasn't right, and he'd ask Sean to come help him open another box. After decisively choosing another box, Sean and Don lifted up the cover, and they were taken aback when they saw it, because they had found another deformed body. The students thought this must be a coincidence, but as Don requested Sean to open another box, this time they found a kid with a deformed leg. The students were starting to feel anxious, and as Don ordered everybody to keep opening boxes, they quickly found another one, and another one, and another one. Deformed bodies on deformed bodies was the only thing that Don saw from the boxes. Suddenly his head starts to hurt, and the group went to check on Don. But as Don opened his eyes again, he was now in another illusion with yellow corpses floating in a pool and chains tied around their necks. Don then noticed the corpses has the same deformed limbs as the ones from his world, and curiously wonders if they were previously humans. A deformed hand came springing out of the pool, and it tried to attack Don. Luckily Don was pulled back into reality by Sean. The crew then asked if he was alright, and Don replied that he was fine. At this moment Professor Choi enters the room and questions why they were being so loud, but when he then noticed the boxes were open for no reason, Professor Choi got upset and starts scolding them to stop playing around, and in the middle of him telling them to close all the boxes, it was there he saw the many deformed limbs of the corpses, and he was speechless when he did. Yet he quickly regained his composure and said everything was fine and to quickly choose a box. So after the students closed all of the open boxes, they quickly chose one. Later at the autopsy lab of East Medical School, the students had told the situation about the many deformed bodies to Professor Gu. Although Professor Gu thought the contest the government was conducting was also unusual, he thinks this is a great opportunity for them to grow, since the government has provided such scarce resources for them to train. And as for the body, Professor Gu has no idea if it's a work of deformation or if the body suffered from a congenital disease at birth. He then told his student to begin the dissection near the deformed limb, yet the students expressed this was too hard for them. Professor Gu then shouts at them to stop whining, and ordered Erica and Julian to go first. Erica and Julian then bowed before getting to work, but Julian was having difficulty starting, yet he followed his instincts, and starts cutting the back of the hand. He then nods at Erica, and it was now Erica's time to take over. Erica begins working, yet she came across an obstacle when dissecting the hand. She'd realized she can't feel the superficial fascia when cutting through the skin of the hand, but Professor Gu advises her to keep going, and Erica nodded. But Gu came spewing out when she applied more pressure. Don worriedly told her to watch out, and Erica tried dodging from the dark goo. Pulled her out in time, and the goo landed splat on the floor. Don then worriedly asked if she was okay, causing Erica to blush. Yet Professor Gu was annoyed and told them to act more professional. Don then apologizes while feeling flustered. Afterwards Professor Gu checks on the dissected hand, and realized it could be a subdermal cyst. Professor Gu then asked them to keep going, so after a bit more of cutting and dissecting the hand, they managed to peel apart the skin on the back of the hand. Erica then announced they were complete with finding the superficial fascia, and Professor Gu said they can stop at this part, before reminding his students to stay calm when doing dissections. Next it was Don's turn to try. Erica gave him the scalpel and told him to go for it. Don accepted the scalpel and thanks her, before going back inside his mind, and seeing the hard quest which wants him to dissect a deformed body within 3 days. Don quickly pressed accept, and the countdown starts counting. He then picked up a surgical scissor and starts pulling the superficial fascia. It was here he'd realized the reason why Erica didn't feel the superficial fascia when she cut the hand open. It was because the superficial fascia was twisted and mixed together due to the deformation. Erica then curiously came over to see and concludes that Don's theory might be correct. But because the two students were so close to each other, they turn away in embarrassment. Professor Gu also thought Don might be onto something and wanted him to prove his theory. Don earnestly accepted this request and activates his calm hand so he could straighten out the superficial fascia. Don was swift in his actions, and since he did everything with such precision, some of the students were cheering him on, while others were amazed at how well he was performing. Julian was the only one jealous at Don's abilities. Soon the twisted fascia was straightened out, and Don tells Professor Gu that there's a lot of fluid in the fascia, so it isn't a subdermal cyst. Professor Gu was satisfied with Don's answer and asked him to keep going. Don states the veins should still be in their original position but is now twisted and folded. He then decided to cut the superficial fascia open to show them. After tearing of the superficial fascia, the veins were shown to be separated. Professor Gu asked what he thinks of this. Don replied, a congenitally deformed vein and fascia must follow the growth of a deformed structure, but since this body wasn't born with deformities, he thinks that this body must have acquired deformation at a later date for some reason. Professor Gu bursted out laughing in joy and states that Don is now qualified for the contest. He then tells his students to take a break, yet Don wasn't finished working, and he requests Professor Gu to keep dissecting the body, because he wants to stay here for the next few days and hone his skills. Professor Gu then inquires if there was anyone else that wants to join Don. Erica raised up her hand much to Don's surprise, and of course Sean also wanted to stay. Since there were a lot of students participating, Professor Gu allows them to continue. Don quickly thanks the professor before they start dissecting and sharing theories about the deformed body. After 3 hours of dissecting, Don has only completed about 10% of the quest, and he was starting to feel tired, but Don still wanted to continue, yet Sean suggests they should take a break. The other 3 students then arrives, and Johanna brought them their food and shyly urges Don to take a break. Sean then gave a pitiful look and once again insists they should take a break. Don heaved a big sigh and decided to go have dinner. However, when they left their autopsy room, they were surprised by how many students were preparing for the contest. Erica then remarks that they weren't the only ones working hard, before saying her goodbyes and heading to her dormitory. Half an hour later of eating their food and relaxing, Don and Sean were ready to get back to work when they suddenly overhear 2 students talking about an outbreak of some epidemic. Of course, they didn't think a mass deformation of bodies could be a sign of an epidemic, but they did think the government must be conducting a secret experiment that went wrong. Although Don and Sean felt a chill ran down their spine, they quickly got back to work with the help of Erica. And on the 3rd day, with 14 minutes remaining, Don had carefully detached the liver from the deformed body, and he was able to remove it before handing it over to Sean. The system then notifies him that he has completed the hard quest, and he will be rewarded with 1 atlas of mutilated structure. Don was relieved that he finally completed the quest, but his head starts to feel dizzy, and Erica asks if he was alright. Don says he's just tired from all of the dissection and he'll recover after a bit of rest in his dormitory. Don then leaves the medical building and heads to his room so he could claim his reward. Later at the student's dormitory, Don could feel his mastery over the calm hands had improved by a lot, and it won't be long till he reached the 3rd level. Don then enters his mind and accepted the reward of the hard quest, but suddenly felt a pang of pain and unknowingly finds himself in the mysterious domain of the system again. The obelisk afterwards starts glowing, and it shot out a hologram of an atlas. The atlas depicts the thoracic structure of some sort of primate. Don touches it and learns the hologram has the function to zoom in and zoom out. So after resizing the image to his liking, Don noticed the weird text below the illustration, yet he was having a hard time putting it all together, when he abruptly realized there were many words that had the same characters as the labeling points. So using the artwork of the body combined with the labeling points, Don tried to decipher the meaning behind the atlas, yet only recognizing a handful of words was meaningless when trying to decode an entire paragraph. However, Don did notice the writings were written in an oddly rushed manner, and he could sense the shock and panic from the person who wrote this. Don again felt a sharp pain, and this time he sees a banyan tree in a foggy area. He takes a closer look at the deformed kid climbing up the tree. Don then noticed something even more disturbing, because beneath the tree was a pile of deformed bodies. Suddenly the deformed kid fell from the tree, and Don tried to catch him, but he fails to do so, and the kid's blood splashes onto Don's face. Yet Don was shocked to his core when he saw who the kid was, because the deformed kid was actually him. Don then came back to reality screaming from the top of his lungs, scaring Sean, who had just came back. So after Don apologizes to Sean, they later ate some ramen together. A bit later, while Sean was cleaning up his dishes, Don remembers about seeing the banyan tree in his illusion from an advertisement somewhere. So he quickly found it on his phone, and also finds out the body he dissected today was the body of the party secretary of Banyan Village. Don thinks the origins of the deformities might have come from Banyan Village, and suspects that all the new bodies they received was from this village as well. Yet it was too risky to go there himself. Luckily, Don found a phone number on the Banyan Village tourism page, and he quickly told Sean that he'll be going out for a bit. Later, at an urban area around East Medical School, Don had came to a convenience store and had purchased a throwaway SIM card. He then stood under a lamp post before inserting the SIM card into his phone. Don quickly took out the Banyan Village's number before trying to call them. Miraculously, the phone wasn't out of service, but after a while of waiting, Don was starting to lose hope when suddenly someone picked up the phone. The person on the other side began talking, but Don couldn't hear anything because the streets were making too much noise. Don decided to change his spot and quickly found a more secluded area. Don then heard an eerie and disturbing voice that said, "Help me," which causes him to jump back in fright. Yet Don quickly regained his composure and once again listened. The deformed person on the other side begs Don to save him because he doesn't want to die. Don hurriedly asks if he was alright, but the man uttered the things in Banyan Forest before the phone call was cut off. Don starts to realize that things were more serious than he'd imagined, and as he's about to leave and ponder about his next plan, a man with dark glasses calls to him, and Don noticed this man to be his stalker. The man asked Don to hand over the files, but Don was confused by what the man meant, and states that he doesn't have the files. The man then warns Don that he could end up like his parents if he doesn't listen. Yet Don lashes out and expressed the man must be a staff of Clayson Tech, and that Clayson Tech should be held responsible for this. However, the man revealed that Clayson Tech wasn't the one who caused his parents' death. But Don didn't believe him and announced that he'll expose Clayson Tech to the world, while also snapping a few pictures of the man. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman slammed her doors open and told the both of them to stop making so much noise. The man then bids Don farewell and hopes he changes his mind before the man took his leave. Meanwhile, Don learns that Clayson Tech has been monitoring him since his parents' disappearance, and that Clayson Tech thinks he has the mysterious files they want. Don later arrives back at his dormitory, but Sean quickly slams the door in his face to inform him of something important. After apologizing to Don for his rash behavior, Sean tells Don that the competition was moved up to tomorrow. So while Sean prayed they will do well, Don was determined to find out some clues tomorrow. The next day, in the municipal stadium of East City, after Professor Gu gave everyone their competition ID, he was greeted by a friend called Professor Yu. As the two friends continue to converse with each other, Johanna asks Julian why he was shaking so much. Julian reveals he was nervous since Professor Yu's team is considered the best team in their school. Their leader Robert Ma has nailed the first prize scholarship for 6 straight years. Then there was the rivaling school called QS Medical University, who was also in the contest. Not to mention the other competitors, it's basically impossible to stand out among these people. The students later line up for a security check. After the guards had finished checking them, they were allowed to enter the stadium, and was even given vomiting bags just in case. Later, after everyone had taken their seats, the opening ceremony was about to start soon. Don then noticed a hand on his shoulder, and Erica asked if he was feeling better. Don admits he felt great and was fully prepared. A few people then came on stage and asked for the attention of the students. The old man reveals he was David Cheen, the chairman of the judging panel for this competition, and he expressed that they're going to select some medical talents for emerging medical needs. So he hopes everyone gives their all, because those who perform well this morning will get off to the best start. The student then began clapping for David, and David signals the security guard to bring it out. David then remarks that he hopes everyone will qualify for the next part, before the door behind him suddenly opens, and a cage was brought out, with dark goo spilling onto the ground. Everyone was in shock by what they were seeing. Even Professor Goo himself didn't know what to make of this, because it was an amalgamation of deformed bodies being stitched together. Sean nervously tells Don that the bodies they dissected had the same limbs as the amalgamation, and Don realizes he saw these weird creatures back when he activated the system for the first time. Johanna couldn't take it and she began to puke. This caused Julian and Harvey to also puke, which results in most of students in the stadium puking. David then told his assistant to quickly mark down each student's reaction in detail, because they can also use this information to find the best medical student. David then announced that it was time to get down to business, and wanted their opinion about this thing, because he reveals it was dead, but at the same time alive. The medical students fell into absolute silence, and David wonders if the students had any thoughts on it. A student then raised his hand to say something. Julian reveals it was QS Medical University's best student. Jake wanted to know if that thing was really alive, and John Yang asked if they stitched that thing together with different body parts. However, David said they didn't stitch it together, and it could still be alive and even grow. David then turned to East Medical School students and asked if there was any questions. The security guard then gave the microphone over to Robert, and Robert awkwardly took it. Robert unfortunately replied he has the same question as QS Medical University. Jake gave a smug look at his rivaling school, and David disappointedly asked if there was any other universities that wanted to give their opinions. Suddenly Don stood up to confirm something, but the students from his school would quickly gossip bad things about him. Luckily his friends would come to his defense, and David wanted to hear his thoughts on this thing. Don confidently stated that it looks like a banyan tree. David was surprised and wanted to hear more from Don. Yet Don asked if he could take a closer look. David naturally allows it, and Don was escorted towards the cage. After arriving near the cage, Don would examine it closely, and he seems to have figured something out. Apparently the bodies aren't mixed up, but the limbs are all stretched out like a tree branch. While the main body is the trunk, the veins, nerves, and limbs are the aerial roots, and their head signals the species they've merged with. Don assumes that this thing grows by merging, and it isn't limited to just humans either. David was pleased and asked Don to keep going. Don remarks he noticed something when dissecting the deformed bodies to prepare for the competition. The boxes that contains the bodies came with a solution made of white lime water, and people normally apply whitewash on trees to eliminate bacteria, fungi, and bugs. So the white lime water was probably used in the same manner, to keep that thing from merging with other microbes and grow. David was impressed with Don's theory and wonders what he thinks about the status of that amalgamation. Don requests to enter the cage and check a bit more. David was boldness, and quickly ordered someone to bring a mask and gloves for Don. After putting on his gloves and mask, Don fearlessly enters the cage, but the security guard quickly locks it, and his friends hopes nothing bad happens. Don then inspects it carefully, and could see the cornea has turned turbid, which means that this thing is dead. But Don wanted to confirm something and moved his hand in closer. The eyes of the monster then reacted, and it starts screaming words like help. Don was surprised by the sudden cry for help, but noticed that this thing has the same sound as the man who answered his call from Banyan Village. Suddenly the eyes of all the creatures lit up, and they cried out words like, "I'm not dead. Why? Ow, that hurts. Help me." And no. All of the students in the stadium at this moment were terrified, and Johanna couldn't bear to look at it. Don realized that he caused this thing's eyes to dilate and start bawling. So if he reached his hand in close and gently cover this thing's eyes, Don was able to calm it down. The whole stadium was surprised, and even David himself was left speechless for a bit. Meanwhile, Don continues doing the same thing to a few more heads, before David calls for him to come out. David then wonders if Don could answer his question now. Don confirms that they're 100% dead. However, this creepy merger has given them life as a new species, and the bawling only proves that they were once human, but they're far from the revivification that they know of. David was amazed by Don's answer, and couldn't help but clap in admiration. All the students then followed suit, with Jake and Robert being impressed by Don, Professor Goo mocking the other students for talking badly about Don, and his friends who congratulate him on a wonderful explanation, especially Erica, who was liking Don even more now. But David asked for their attention again, and states that Don's analysis was mostly correct, because this creature is considered dead in the context of their medical knowledge. Yet what they saw wasn't a ghost but something similar to a frog's spinal reflex, and they would call this virus the banyan syndrome, because this pathogen is probably related to the banyan tree. Most of the students was in fear of the new virus that could lead to a terrifying pandemic, while David nodded for his subordinate to turn on the TV. David then explains there was 3 stages to this syndrome. Stage 1 is the incubation period where the virus shows no symptom in the human body. Stage 2 involves the limbs being twisted and warped because the virus cells destroy the normal tissue cells just like a cancer cells, yet patients can still be saved if their limbs are amputated in time. David expressed the deformed bodies given to the students were also in the second stage, however they failed to get proper treatment in time and died. There's also no supportive data for matters including postoperative recurring and the lifespan of the patient, so more clinical research is needed. Finally, stage 3 is a period of significant deformities and ulcers are seen everywhere except the head. The patient will experience muscle spasm and constant severe pain with confusion, delirium, and mania. Patient at this stage also has no self-conscious and will be tangled up if another patient at the same stage is around. They will then grow new skins that can't be separated, before assuming the shape of a banyan tree. David says they're no longer human but are instead a new creature, and these creatures are found in 2 states, alive or dead. A living quasi-banyan can merge with other creatures to grow and secrete black fluid which are highly contagious. Anyone exposed to an active black fluid will be infected, and they will soon reach the 3rd stage. The students then see 2 scientists experimenting with the living quasi-banyan. The scientist would take a mouse and put it in the cage with the creature. The creature's hand would then start to move forward, before aggressively grabbing onto the mouse, with active black fluid infecting the mouse, causing the mouse body to twist and turn, before it dies with a deformed body. The students were terrified of this scene, and David explains that these creatures attract other mergers by making sound, so stay calm and get away immediately when you see them. Now that David has finished talking about the living quasi-banyan, he starts explaining about the dead one that Don made contact with earlier. If they put the creature in a vacuum lab within an hour and a half, the creature and the black fluid will not be contagious anymore, yet its unconditional reflex will occur whenever other creature comes close. And as for why closing the creature's eyes could end their reflex, the med doesn't have an answer. Don theorized the skin was transformed into a nerve receptor by the deactivated fluid, and Erica agrees that once we get closer our breath could possibly stimulate the black fluid, so it reaches the nerve system and cause those reflexes. A student then raised his hand, and Jake asked if the pathogen was related to the banyan tree and how was it spread. Unfortunately, David can't disclose the details of the pathogen, but there are 2 ways the virus can spread. First is the direct contact with the banyan tree of the virus origin, or direct skin contact with the active black fluid. David then announced the end of the assembly, and says that for the people that didn't pass, they will be sent to work in ordinary hospitals. He then asked everybody to come sign the term of confidentiality agreement, so what they saw today doesn't get out to the public. David then leaves the gymnasium with his subordinates. While walking through the hall, David expressed he was deeply impressed by Don's performance today, and his subordinate insists they should do their best to recruit him. David agrees because finding talents like this are rare. However, another subordinate who had just finished checking Don's background informs David of Don's partying habits in university. David was upset Don had changed. A while later, after the confidential documents were signed, we learn that Don, Erica, and Sean made it through the first round. The others, however, were not so lucky, but they insist they were happy to work in an ordinary hospital. Professor Yu then came to congratulate his friend for having half of his students be picked, and Robert gave Don a friendly smile. Don gave a friendly nod in return. His friends then wished them good luck on the second round, and Don thanks them. In the evening, the dissection contest was about to begin, and only 32 people were qualified to take part in it. Don then enters his mind, and he wanted to complete the hard quest, which wants him to dissect one abnormal body part of a non-human within a day, so he can get 3 complete pages of the diagnosis work diary, and try to decode the strange text of the atlas with the help of the 3 pages. David and his subordinates then enters the room and told everybody to get ready. The students then made their way to the dissection table, before pressing the red button and opening the table. The thing inside the table surprised the students greatly, and Don was the only student who
Hi
recognized
everyone, welcome to my channel. If you want to see part 2 of this manhwa, make sure to comment on this video, and also if you want to know the name of this manhwa, you can see here. And also if you want to see more this kind of video, you can see here. And don't forget to subscribe our channel to see more exciting videos. Thank you everyone.